20 of the world's most renowned doctors couldn't save the dying young billionaire. But then, a 7-year-old flower girl selling roses outside the hospital noticed something they all missed, and what she discovered shocked everyone in the room. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The monitors screamed their electronic warnings as Robert Harrison's vital signs plummeted for the 4th time in 6 hours. At 35, the tech billionaire who had revolutionized artificial intelligence was now fighting a battle that no amount of money could win. His breathing was shallow, labored, and getting worse by the minute. "His oxygen levels are critical again, Dr. Patterson," Nurse Foster announced, her voice tight with concern. "Blood pressure dropping fast." Dr. James Patterson, Chief of Internal Medicine at Manhattan General, wiped sweat from his forehead. In 30 years of practice, he'd never encountered anything like this. 20 of the world's most renowned specialists had flown in from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and Harvard Medical. Cardiologists, neurologists, toxicologists. They'd run every test imaginable, tried every treatment protocol, and still Robert Harrison was slipping away. The MRI shows no brain trauma. The blood work is clean, except for the dropping oxygen saturation, Dr. Sarah Williams from Johns Hopkins muttered, flipping through the thick medical chart. "It's like his body is slowly shutting down for no apparent reason." Outside the intensive care unit's glass walls, the hospital corridors buzzed with unusual activity. Security guards kept reporters at bay, while Robert's legal team huddled in hushed conversations. The Harrison Tech stock price had plummeted 20% since news of his condition leaked 3 days ago. In the corner of the hallway, almost invisible among the chaos, 7-year-old Lucy Martinez sat quietly on a waiting room chair, swinging her legs. Her mother Maria had been working double shifts, cleaning the ICU floors and emptying trash bins, trying to stay close to the unfolding drama. Lucy clutched a worn teddy bear and watched the parade of important-looking doctors with wide, observant eyes. "Mommy, why are all those doctors looking so worried?" Lucy whispered in her soft voice, tugging at her mother's uniform sleeve. Maria Martinez knelt down beside her daughter, smoothing Lucy's dark hair. "They're trying very hard to help that sick man, Mija. Sometimes even the smartest doctors need time to figure things out." But Lucy's attention had shifted. Through the glass partition, she could see Robert Harrison lying motionless on the hospital bed, connected to multiple machines. Something about the scene made her small hands tremble, and memories she'd tried to forget came rushing back. The way his chest rose and fell with difficulty, the pale grey colour of his skin, the strange, sweet smell that seemed to linger in the air around the room. Lucy had seen all of this before, 8 months ago, when her father had lain in a similar bed in the charity ward downstairs. And just like now, all the doctors had been puzzled, running tests, scratching their heads, while her father slowly faded away. Lucy's grip tightened on her teddy bear as a terrifying realization began to form in her young mind. She remembered something the doctors had missed about her father, something crucial that she'd tried to tell them, but nobody had listened to a little girl. As another alarm began blaring from Robert Harrison's room, Lucy stood up from her chair with determination burning in her dark eyes. She knew exactly what was happening to the billionaire, and this time she wasn't going to let anyone ignore her. Lucy took a deep breath and walked toward the nurse's station, her small sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The head nurse, Mrs. Thompson, was frantically coordinating with the medical team when Lucy tugged at her white coat. "Excuse me, Mrs. Thompson," Lucy said politely, her voice barely audible above the chaos. "I need to tell the doctor something really important about Mr. Harrison." Mrs. Thompson barely glanced down, her fingers flying across her computer keyboard as she updated patient charts. Sweetie, not now. The doctors are very busy trying to help the sick man. Why don't you go sit with your mother and maybe draw some pictures? Daddy, but I know what's wrong with him, Lucy insisted, her voice growing more urgent. She stepped closer to the nurse's station, standing on her tiptoes to be seen better. My daddy had the same thing, and the doctors couldn't figure it out either, but I remember Lucy Martinez. Her mother's voice cut through the corridor like a whip. Maria hurried over, her cleaning cart rattling behind her, face flushed with embarrassment and exhaustion from working 16-hour shifts. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thompson. She's been worried about that patient since yesterday. Come on, Mija, you can't bother the nurses when they're trying to save someone's life. But, Mummy, I'm not bothering them. I'm trying to help, Lucy protested as her mother gently but firmly guided her away from the nurses' station. Nobody listened when Daddy was sick, and now nobody's listening about Mr. Harrison, and he's going to die just like enough, Maria whispered sharply, kneeling down to Lucy's eye level near the hospital's large windows overlooking Central Park. Lucy, I know you miss Daddy terribly. We both do, but you can't keep thinking that every sick person has what Daddy had. These are the best doctors in the world. They know what they're doing. Through the glass partition, Lucy watched helplessly as another team of specialists rushed into Robert Harrison's room. Dr. Patterson was shaking his head while consulting with a toxicologist from Boston Children's Hospital who had flown in that morning. The billionaire's legal team paced anxiously in the hallway, their expensive suits wrinkled from days of stress. Security guards kept reporters and photographers at bay, but Lucy could see the camera crews gathered on the street below. Look at all those doctors, Mummy, Lucy said quietly, pressing her small hand against the cool glass. 20 of them, and they all look scared, just like the doctors looked when they couldn't help Daddy. Maria's heart ached as she watched her daughter's mature observation. At 7 years old, Lucy had already witnessed more medical trauma than most adults. But Maria couldn't let her daughter live in the fantasy that she could solve mysteries that stumped world-renowned physicians. That night, Lucy lay awake on the small cot the hospital had provided for families of employees working extended shifts. The ICU never truly slept. There were always monitors beeping, nurses checking on patients, the soft whisper of conversations in multiple languages as international specialists consulted through the night. Lucy stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in each square, but her mind kept drifting back to those final weeks with her father. She remembered how Roberto Martinez, who had been strong enough to carry her on his shoulders for hours, had gradually become so weak he couldn't lift a glass of water. The doctors had run so many tests, blood work, X-rays, MRIs, CT scans. They'd checked for cancer, for heart disease, for lung problems related to his construction work, but nothing explained why a healthy 32-year-old man was simply fading away. Most clearly of all, Lucy remembered the smell. That strange, sweet scent that had clung to her father's hospital room, growing stronger each day until it was almost overwhelming. She'd asked the nurses about it, but they dismissed it as cleaning products or flowers from the chapel downstairs. But now, 3 floors up in the VIP wing, she'd smelled that exact same scent drifting from Robert Harrison's room. 8 months earlier, 7-year-old Lucy had spent countless hours by her father's bedside in the charity ward on the 3rd floor. Roberto Martinez, who had immigrated from Guatemala 15 years ago and worked his way up from day laborer to construction foreman, had been reduced to a frail shadow of himself in just 2 weeks. The charity ward was different from the VIP wing, where Mr. Harrison lay fighting for his life. The rooms were smaller, cramped with 2 beds each, and the hallways echoed with a dozen different languages as families from all over the world kept vigil over their loved ones. But the medical mystery had been just as baffling. It's probably some kind of environmental exposure, Doctor. Rodriguez had told Lucy's mother during one of their brief consultations in the hallway. He was a kind man, but Lucy could see the frustration in his eyes as he flipped through her father's thick chart. Construction workers encounter many hazardous materials over their careers. We're checking for asbestos exposure, lead poisoning, chemical toxicity from paints and solvents. His lungs show some scarring consistent with long-term dust exposure, but nothing that would explain this rapid decline. Lucy had been sitting quietly in the corner, coloring in a Disney princess book that one of the nurses had given her, but she was listening to every word. She'd learned to be very still and quiet during medical discussions, because that's when the adults forgot she was there and said important things. What about the smell? Lucy had piped up suddenly, causing both Dr. Rodriguez and her mother to look down at her in surprise. Daddy's room smells different than all the other rooms. Sweet, like when Abuela makes marzipan cookies at Christmas. Dr. Rodriguez had smiled and patted Lucy's head gently. Hospitals have many different smells, little one. Sometimes we use special cleaning products, and visitors bring flowers and food from home. But Lucy had persisted, standing up from her chair and tugging at the doctor's white coat. No, Dr. Rodriguez, it's not like flowers or cleaning. It's sweet, but also bitter, and it makes my nose tingle. And Daddy says everything tastes like bitter almonds now, even his favorite coffee. She'd watched the doctor exchange a look with her mother, one of those adult looks that said, "Children say the strangest things without actually speaking." Dr. Rodriguez had made a note on his clipboard, but Lucy could tell he wasn't taking her seriously. "We'll look into everything, I promise," he'd said kindly. "Sometimes when people are very sick, their senses can play tricks on them." But Lucy knew it wasn't tricks. Every morning when she brought her father his breakfast tray, scrambled eggs and toast from the hospital cafeteria, he could barely eat more than a few bites. "Everything tastes wrong, mi niña," he'd whispered weakly, his voice already starting to fade, "like someone put bitter medicine in my food." 3 days later, Roberto Martinez had died in the pre-dawn hours, while Lucy and her mother dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable chairs beside his bed. The death certificate listed the cause as acute respiratory failure of unknown origin, and the case was closed. Now, 8 months later, Lucy understood with crystal clarity what the adults had missed. The sweet almond smell wasn't from cleaning products or flowers. Her father's strange taste complaints weren't from being sick. Someone had been slowly poisoning him, just like someone was now poisoning Mr. Harrison, and this time Lucy wasn't going to let the adults ignore her. Dr. Patterson was reviewing Robert Harrison's latest blood work results for the 3rd time that morning when a small, determined voice interrupted his concentration. "Doctor, please, I really need to talk to you about Mr. Harrison." He looked down from his desk to see Lucy Martinez standing beside his chair, clutching a manila folder against her chest. Her dark eyes were filled with a determination that seemed far too mature and intense for a 7-year-old girl. She was wearing the same pink sweater she'd had on for 2 days, and her hair was pulled back in a slightly crooked ponytail that spoke of a working mother's hurried morning routine. "Little girl, I'm very busy right now," Dr. Patterson said, glancing at his watch. It was barely 7 a.m., and he'd been at the hospital for 18 straight hours. Dark circles under his eyes revealed the toll that Robert Harrison's mysterious condition was taking on the entire medical team. "Your mother should be watching you more carefully. The ICU isn't a playground." "My name is Lucy Martinez, and my mother is working the night shift cleaning the floors," she replied, with surprising composure and precision. "She doesn't know I'm here because I snuck away from the family waiting room. Mr. Harrison is going to die if you don't listen to me, just like my daddy died 8 months ago from exactly the same thing." Something in her tone, the matter-of-fact way she discussed her father's death, the adult vocabulary, the steady eye contact, made Dr. Patterson pause his review of the medical charts. He'd been working around the clock for 3 days, consulting with colleagues from around the world, and desperation was beginning to cloud his usually methodical thinking. Still, the idea of taking medical advice from a child seemed not just absurd, but potentially dangerous. "Lucy, I appreciate that you want to help Mr. Harrison, and I'm sorry about your father," Dr. Patterson said gently but firmly, turning slightly in his chair to face her properly. "But medicine is extremely complicated. The doctors treating Mr. Harrison include some of the most brilliant physicians in the world. They've trained for decades to understand how the human body works." Lucy opened the folder she'd somehow acquired, her father's complete medical file from his 2-week stay in the charity ward. Dr. Patterson's eyebrows shot up in alarm as he recognized the hospital's official documentation. "Young lady, where did you get those records? Patient files are strictly confidential, and there are serious legal consequences for—" "I had to take them because nobody believes me," Lucy interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "My daddy smelled like sweet almonds when he was sick, exactly like Mr. Harrison's room smells now. And they both started having trouble breathing the same way, and their skin turned the same grey color, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong, even though they ran all the same tests." Dr. Patterson leaned forward, his medical curiosity beginning to override his concern about protocol violations. "Lucy, what exactly do you mean by sweet almonds? Can you describe this smell more specifically?" Lucy's face lit up with hope. Finally, an adult was asking her for details instead of dismissing her observations. "It's not like regular almonds, Dr. Patterson. It's sweeter but also bitter, and it gets stronger every day. In Daddy's room, by the end, it was so strong that I felt dizzy when I stayed too long. And Mr. Harrison's room smells exactly the same, but it's getting stronger just like Daddy's did." Before Dr. Patterson could respond, urgent alarms began blaring from the ICU. Robert Harrison was crashing again, and this time his blood oxygen levels were approaching critically dangerous territory. But as Dr. Patterson jumped up to rush toward the emergency, Lucy's precise description echoed in his mind. Sweet but bitter almonds, a progressively stronger odor, unexplained respiratory distress. Somewhere in the back of his memory, a half-forgotten toxicology lecture from medical school began to surface. The smell of bitter almonds was pathognomonic, a telltale sign of one specific type of poisoning that was notoriously difficult to detect in standard blood tests. "Doctor." Patterson burst into Robert Harrison's room just as the billionaire's heart rate spiked to a dangerous 140 beats per minute. The medical team was working frantically. Dr. Williams was adjusting his oxygen mask, while Dr. Chen from Stanford Medical checked his pupils with a penlight. 2 nurses monitored multiple IV lines, and a respiratory therapist was preparing to increase the ventilator settings. "His neurological responses are deteriorating rapidly," Dr. Chen reported grimly, his voice tight with professional concern. "Pupil response is sluggish, reflexes are diminished, and his color is getting worse despite maximum oxygen therapy. It's like his entire system is shutting down systematically, but we can't identify the underlying cause." The room hummed with the sound of sophisticated medical equipment, ventilators, heart monitors, blood pressure cuffs automatically cycling every few minutes. Robert Harrison lay motionless on the hospital bed, his normally tanned skin now an alarming shade of grey-blue that suggested his body was struggling to process oxygen despite all their interventions. As Dr. Patterson joined the team, that distinctive sweet almond scent hit him immediately, stronger than ever before, almost overwhelming in the closed environment of the ICU room. Lucy's words rang in his ears with sudden, terrifying clarity, and a medical school memory crystallized with perfect, horrible precision. "I need everyone to step back for a moment," he announced suddenly, his voice carrying an authority that made the entire team pause their frantic activities. "James, what are you doing? "We're losing him," Dr. Williams protested, not moving away from the ventilator controls. "His oxygen saturation is dropping, despite maximum support. If we don't intubate him in the next few minutes—" "The almond scent," Dr. Patterson interrupted urgently, looking around the room at his colleagues. "Has anyone else noticed how strong it's gotten? It's not coming from cleaning products or flowers." The team exchanged confused glances, their hands still poised over various medical devices. "Doctor." Chen nodded slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to growing concern. "Yes, I mentioned it to the nurses yesterday. I thought it might be some kind of new air freshener the hospital was using, but it's been getting progressively stronger each day. Almost nauseating now." "Doctor." Patterson's heart began racing as pieces of a deadly puzzle started falling into place with horrifying clarity. "I need an emergency cyanide blood test ordered stat. And I mean immediately. Not the standard toxicology panel we've been running, but a specific hydrogen cyanide level." "Cyanide, Doctor?" Williams looked stunned, her hand freezing on the oxygen controls. "James, we've run comprehensive toxicology panels every day. Multiple panels. There's been no indication of any kind of poisoning, and certainly nothing suggesting cyanide exposure. Standard tox screens often miss cyanide, especially if it's being administered in small, repeated doses over several days," Dr. Patterson explained rapidly, his medical training taking over. "The sweet almond odor is pathognomonic for hydrogen cyanide poisoning. The progressive respiratory failure despite oxygen therapy, the unexplained metabolic decline, the grey-blue skin color, it all fits the classic presentation." Outside in the corridor, Lucy pressed her face against the glass window, watching the doctors work with renewed urgency. Her mother, Maria, had discovered her missing from the waiting room and found her here trying to pull her away from the ICU. "Mummy, look. They're finally listening," Lucy whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "They're going to test for the poison that killed Daddy. They're going to help Mr. Harrison like they should have helped us." But even as hope flickered in Lucy's heart, Robert Harrison's monitors continued to show his vital signs deteriorating. If Dr. Patterson was correct about the cyanide poisoning, they had successfully identified the weapon, but they were still missing the most crucial elements of the crime. Who was systematically murdering Robert Harrison with one of the most deadly poisons known to medicine? How were they gaining access to him in the most secure wing of Manhattan General Hospital? And most terrifyingly of all, were they planning to strike again before the antidote could save his life? The emergency cyanide blood test results arrived 47 agonizing minutes later, and Dr. Patterson's worst medical fears were confirmed in stark, undeniable numbers. Robert Harrison's blood showed dangerously elevated levels of hydrogen cyanide, not from a single massive dose that would have killed him immediately, but from careful, systematic poisoning administered over several days to create the illusion of a mysterious progressive illness. "This is attempted murder, Doctor," Patterson announced grimly to the assembled medical team, holding up the lab results with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and shock. "Someone has been deliberately administering calculated amounts of cyanide, probably through his food or medication, timing the doses to mimic a natural decline that would baffle medical professionals." Dr. Williams stared at the test results in complete disbelief, reading the numbers twice to make sure she understood correctly. "But how is that possible? He's been under constant medical supervision for 3 days. Every medication is tracked and verified by multiple nurses. Every meal comes directly from the hospital kitchen and is delivered by trusted staff. Every visitor has been logged and monitored by security." The implications were staggering and terrifying. Someone with intimate access to Manhattan General Hospital's most secure wing was attempting to commit the perfect murder, using one of the most difficult-to-detect poisons while surrounded by some of the world's best medical minds. As the medical team immediately began emergency cyanide treatment protocols, high-flow oxygen, intravenous sodium thiosulfate as an antidote, and supportive care to protect his organs, Lucy sat in the corridor with tears streaming down her face. Through the glass partition, she watched the controlled chaos of doctors and nurses working to save a life that she had helped identify was in danger. "My daddy could have lived," she whispered to herself, her small hands clenched into fists. "If they had just listened to me, if they had tested for this poison, Daddy would still be here. He would still be taking me to the park on Sundays and helping me with my homework and reading me bedtime stories." Maria knelt beside her daughter, finally beginning to understand the enormous weight of grief and knowledge that Lucy had been carrying alone for 8 months. "Mia, you tried to tell them about Daddy's symptoms, didn't you? The sweet smell, the way his food tasted wrong?" Lucy nodded, her small body shaking with emotion and exhaustion from fighting to be heard by adults who saw her only as a grieving child with an overactive imagination. "The doctors said I was just a little girl who didn't understand medical things. They said children sometimes make up stories when they're scared. But I knew something was wrong, Mummy. I knew Daddy was being hurt by something, and I couldn't make anyone believe me." Dr. Patterson emerged from the ICU 20 minutes later and walked directly to Lucy with an expression that mixed cautious medical optimism with profound respect. For the first time in 3 days of medical crisis, there was genuine hope in his tired eyes. "Lucy," he said quietly, kneeling down to her eye level in the hospital corridor, "you saved Robert Harrison's life tonight. If you hadn't insisted on telling us about the almond smell and the connection to your father's case, Mr. Harrison would have died within hours. The cyanide levels in his blood were approaching lethal concentrations." Lucy looked up at him with eyes that held far too much wisdom and pain for her 7 years. "Will he be okay now? Will the medicine work?" He's responding well to the antidote treatment, and his vital signs are already starting to stabilize," Dr. Patterson assured her. "But Lucy, now we have a much bigger and more dangerous problem. Someone is systematically trying to murder him using a sophisticated poison, and they clearly have access to this hospital. Until we identify who is doing this and how they're administering the cyanide, Mr. Harrison is still in mortal danger." As if summoned by his ominous words, Detective Sarah Martinez, no relation to Lucy and her mother, appeared in the corridor with 2 uniformed officers. The NYPD had been called immediately when the cyanide poisoning was confirmed, and now Manhattan General Hospital had become the scene of an active, attempted murder investigation. Lucy's heart raced as she realized the full, terrifying scope of what they had uncovered. If someone was successfully poisoning Mr. Harrison in the most secure wing of one of New York's best hospitals, they would almost certainly try again. And even worse, a new and horrible possibility was forming in her mind. What if her father's mysterious illness and unexplained death hadn't been mysterious at all? What if someone had murdered Roberto Martinez 8 months ago using the exact same method, and the only witness had been a 7-year-old girl that nobody would listen to? Detective Sarah Martinez had been investigating homicides for 12 years, but she'd never encountered a case quite like this one. A 7-year-old girl had solved a poisoning that stumped 20 world-renowned doctors, and now that same child might hold the key to identifying a killer who had nearly committed the perfect crime. "Lucy, I know this is scary, but I need you to tell me everything you remember about your father's time in the hospital," Detective Martinez said gently, sitting cross-legged on the floor to be at eye level with the little girl. "Even tiny details that might not seem important." Lucy clutched her worn teddy bear tighter, glancing nervously at her mother Maria, who sat beside her in the hospital family conference room. The past few hours had been overwhelming. Watching Mr. Harrison's miraculous recovery, talking to doctors who finally took her seriously, and now answering questions from a real police detective. "My daddy was sick for exactly 14 days, Lucy began slowly, her voice soft but precise. He came to the hospital on a Tuesday because he couldn't breathe good at the construction site. The foreman, Mr. Jameson, drove him here in his truck because Daddy was too weak to drive himself." Detective Martinez took careful notes, impressed by the child's attention to detail. "Do you remember who visited your father during those 2 weeks? Friends from work, neighbors, anyone who brought food or gifts?" Lucy's brow furrowed in concentration. "Tio Miguel came every day after work. He's Daddy's best friend, and they worked on the same construction crew. Senora Rodriguez from our apartment building brought homemade soup twice. And—" Lucy paused, a strange expression crossing her face. "What is it, sweetheart?" Maria asked, stroking her daughter's hair. "There was a lady," Lucy said slowly, "a nurse I didn't recognize. She only came during visiting hours, never when the regular nurses were doing their rounds. She was always very nice to me, gave me candy and coloring books. But she spent a lot of time adjusting Daddy's IV bags and bringing him special drinks that she said would help him feel better." Detective Martinez leaned forward intently. "Can you describe this nurse? What did she look like?" She had blonde hair in a ponytail, and she wore glasses with red frames," Lucy said, closing her eyes to remember better. "She was tall and skinny, and she always smelled like the perfume they sell at the pharmacy downstairs. She told me her name was Nurse Kelly, but I never saw her name tag." Maria's face went pale. "Lucy, why didn't you tell me about this special nurse before?" "She said it was our secret," Lucy replied innocently. "She said some patients need extra special care that the other nurses didn't know about, and I shouldn't mention her visits because it might make the other nurses feel bad." Detective Martinez felt a chill run down her spine. A mysterious nurse with no identification, administering unauthorized treatments while convincing a child to keep secrets. It was textbook predatory behavior designed to create the perfect cover for murder. "Lucy, this is very important," the detective said urgently. "Have you seen this same woman anywhere in the hospital during the past few days while Mr. Harrison has been sick?" Lucy's eyes widened as a terrifying realization began to dawn. "Yesterday, when I was trying to tell Mrs. Thompson about the almond smell, I saw her walking past Mr. Harrison's room. She was wearing different clothes, not a nurse uniform, but it was definitely the same lady, the same red glasses and blonde ponytail." The conference room fell silent except for the sound of Detective Martinez's pen scratching furiously across her notepad. They now had their first real lead in what was clearly a premeditated double murder attempt, and the only witness was a 7-year-old girl whose father had been the killer's first victim. But if this mysterious woman had successfully murdered Roberto Martinez 8 months ago and nearly succeeded with Robert Harrison, how many other mysterious illnesses in Manhattan General might actually have been carefully orchestrated murders? Within 2 hours, Detective Martinez had mobilized a full investigative team. The hospital security office became a makeshift command center as detectives reviewed months of surveillance footage, employee records, and visitor logs. Lucy sat with a police sketch artist, patiently describing every detail she could remember about the mysterious Nurse Kelly. She had a small scar on her left hand, right here," Lucy said, pointing to the space between her thumb and index finger. And when she smiled, one of her front teeth was slightly crooked. "Oh, and she always carried a big black purse with silver buckles. Doctor?" Patterson had provided Detective Martinez with a comprehensive list of everyone who'd had access to Robert Harrison's room over the past 4 days. Nurses, doctors, specialists, cleaning staff, security guards, even the volunteers who delivered flowers and mail to patients' rooms. "Here's what doesn't make sense," Detective Martinez explained to Captain Rodriguez, who had arrived to personally oversee the high-profile case. "We've accounted for every official hospital employee who entered Harrison's room. But security footage shows at least 6 instances over 3 days when someone in scrubs entered his room during shift changes. Times when the hallway cameras would record them, but the on-duty nurses were busy with other patients." Captain Rodriguez studied the blurry surveillance images on the computer screen. "The person is always wearing a surgical mask and cap, keeping their head down. Professional behavior designed to avoid identification. But look at this." He pointed to one particular image. The body height and build could match the description the little girl gave us. Meanwhile, Maria Martinez had been thinking about Lucy's description of the mysterious nurse, and troubling memories were surfacing. "Detective Martinez," she called out across the busy security office, "I need to tell you something about my husband's medical bills." The detective looked up from a stack of employee files. "What about them?" "After Roberto died, the hospital billing department kept sending us charges for medications and treatments that I don't remember him receiving," Maria explained, pulling out a folder of medical bills she'd brought from home. Special IV nutrients, experimental medications, consultations with specialists who supposedly visited him. "But I was there almost every day, and I never saw most of these treatments happening." Detective Martinez examined the billing records with growing excitement. Someone had been systematically documenting fake treatments to justify extended access to Roberto Martinez's room. The perfect cover for repeated poisoning attempts disguised as medical care. "This killer is extremely sophisticated," Detective Martinez realized. "She's not just randomly targeting patients. She's specifically choosing victims whose families won't question medical procedures, creating false documentation to justify her access, and using a poison that mimics natural illness." But as the investigation intensified, a disturbing pattern began to emerge from the hospital's records. Over the past 2 years, Manhattan General had experienced an unusual number of unexplained deaths among patients who should have recovered from routine procedures. All had occurred during evening or weekend shifts when skeleton crews were on duty. All had involved patients from lower-income families who were less likely to demand second opinions or question medical procedures, and all had happened in rooms that security footage showed were visited by an unidentified person in scrubs during shift changes. Lucy Martinez wasn't just the key witness to 2 poisoning attempts. She might be the only person who could help them identify a serial killer who had been operating undetected in Manhattan General Hospital for years. Dr. Patterson approached Detective Martinez with grave concern etched across his face. "We have a serious problem. Robert Harrison's condition has stabilized, but whoever tried to kill him doesn't know that we've identified the poison. If they think he's still dying from mysterious causes, they might attempt to finish the job." "That's exactly what I'm hoping for," Detective Martinez replied grimly. "We're going to set a trap." The plan was carefully orchestrated with hospital administration's full cooperation. Public announcements would continue to describe Robert Harrison's condition as critical and unexplained, while privately a team of undercover detectives would monitor his room around the clock. Every person entering would be tracked by multiple cameras and plainclothes officers. Lucy had been instrumental in developing the surveillance strategy. "She always came during visiting hours when families were around," Lucy explained to the detective team. She said crowds made it easier for her to blend in and do her special treatments without the regular nurses noticing. Maria Martinez had been cleared by hospital security and was now working closely with the police. "I've been thinking about other things," Lucy noticed, but didn't understand at the time, Maria told Detective Martinez. "Lucy, tell them about the smell in Daddy's room." "It wasn't just the sweet almond smell," Lucy said thoughtfully. "Before that started, there was a different smell, like the medicine cabinet at home when you open it, sharp and clean, but not like the hospital's regular cleaning smell." Detective Martinez exchanged glances with the forensics expert who had joined their team. That could be the scent of the delivery method, possibly alcohol or another solvent used to dissolve the cyanide for easier administration. The trap was set for the evening shift, when the hospital traditionally had fewer staff members and more opportunities for someone to move undetected through the corridors. Undercover officers posed as family members in the waiting areas, while others dressed as hospital maintenance workers positioned themselves throughout the VIP wing. At 7:43 p.m., hospital security cameras captured a figure in scrubs and a surgical mask entering through the staff entrance near the parking garage. The person moved confidently through the corridors, nodding professionally to other medical staff, carrying a small black medical bag. Detective Martinez watched the live feed from the security office with growing anticipation. "That's our suspect. Same build, same height as the sketch description. And look," she pointed to the screen. "Red glasses frames visible even under the surgical mask." The figure approached Robert Harrison's room just as a shift change was occurring, the exact timing that would provide maximum opportunity and minimum observation from regular staff. But this time, instead of an unguarded victim, the room contained a fully conscious patient under round-the-clock police protection. As the suspect reached for the door handle to Robert Harrison's room, Detective Martinez gave the signal to her team positioned throughout the corridor. "NYPD, freeze! Put your hands where we can see them." But instead of surrendering, the figure turned and ran toward the emergency stairwell, revealing something that made Detective Martinez's blood run cold. The person wasn't just carrying a black medical bag. Strapped to their waist was a small device that looked suspiciously like an explosive. If they couldn't complete their mission to kill Robert Harrison quietly, they were apparently prepared to eliminate all the witnesses who could identify them, even if it meant destroying an entire wing of Manhattan General Hospital. The chase through Manhattan General's emergency stairwells lasted only 3 minutes, but it felt like hours to Detective Martinez as she pursued the fleeing suspect down 7 flights of concrete steps. The killer was fast and clearly familiar with the hospital's layout, but the weight of the medical bag and explosive device slowed their escape. "Stop! There's nowhere to go!" Detective Martinez shouted as backup officers sealed off all the building exits. "The hospital is surrounded!" On the ground floor landing, the suspect finally stopped running and slowly turned around. With deliberate movements, they reached up and removed the surgical mask and cap, revealing the face that Lucy Martinez had described with perfect accuracy 8 months ago. Dr. Amanda Foster, a respected anesthesiologist who had worked at Manhattan General for 6 years. "Dr. Foster?" Detective Martinez stared in shock. She'd interviewed Amanda Foster twice during the investigation, and the woman had been cooperative, professional, even helpful in suggesting medical theories about Robert Harrison's mysterious illness. "You don't understand what you've done," Dr. Foster said calmly, her hand hovering near the device at her waist. "Robert Harrison isn't just some innocent billionaire. He's the reason my brother is dead." Detective Martinez kept her weapon trained on the doctor while speaking into her radio to update backup units. "What are you talking about, Dr. Foster?" 3 years ago, Harrison Tech developed an AI system for medical diagnostics. My brother David was one of the lead programmers. He discovered that the system had fatal flaws. It would misdiagnose critical conditions in poor patients while prioritizing treatment for wealthy ones. When David tried to blow the whistle, Robert Harrison had him fired and blacklisted from the entire tech industry. Dr. Foster's voice grew harder, more bitter. David couldn't find work anywhere. He lost his apartment, his insurance, his hope. He died by suicide 18 months ago because Robert Harrison destroyed his life to protect his company's profits. That doesn't justify murder, Detective Martinez said firmly. And what about Roberto Martinez? What did Lucy's father ever do to you? A twisted smile crossed Dr. Foster's face. Roberto Martinez was supposed to be practice. I needed to perfect the cyanide delivery method, to understand exactly how much to use and how frequently to administer it. I chose him because he was poor, undocumented, and no one would question a construction worker dying from job-related illness. The casual cruelty of using an innocent man as a test subject for murder made Detective Martinez's stomach turn. You used a 7-year-old girl's father as your guinea pig? I never intended for the child to be so observant, Dr. Foster admitted. When she started asking questions about smells and symptoms, I realized she was more perceptive than I'd anticipated. But children's testimony isn't taken seriously in medical settings. I figured I was safe. Through her radio earpiece, Detective Martinez heard that Lucy and Maria Martinez had been safely evacuated from the hospital along with all patients from the surrounding floors. Bomb squad specialists were en route, but they needed more time. Dr. Foster, I need you to carefully remove that device and place it on the ground, Detective Martinez said. We can work out a deal. You're clearly intelligent and had understandable motivations. Let's resolve this without anyone else getting hurt. But Dr. Foster shook her head sadly. You still don't understand. Robert Harrison isn't my only target. His company's AI systems have been installed in hospitals across the country. Hundreds of poor patients have died because of diagnostic bias built into his algorithms. He's a mass murderer who hides behind philanthropy and medical innovation. Then let's expose that through the legal system, Detective Martinez urged. Help us investigate Harrison Tech. Be a witness, not a casualty. For a moment, Dr. Foster seemed to waver, her hand moving away from the explosive device. But then her expression hardened with renewed determination. The legal system failed my brother. It failed Roberto Martinez. It fails poor patients every day while protecting billionaires like Robert Harrison. Her hand moved back toward the detonator. Sometimes justice requires sacrifice. High above them in the hospital's VIP wing, Lucy Martinez was about to provide one final crucial insight that would save everyone's life and reveal the last piece of Dr. Foster's deadly plan. In the hospital's emergency command center, Lucy Martinez sat beside her mother while FBI bomb specialists coordinated with the NYPD to end the standoff safely. Through the radio communications, she could hear Detective Martinez trying to negotiate with Dr. Foster in the stairwell 7 floors below. But something about the conversation wasn't making sense to Lucy. She tugged at Captain Rodriguez's sleeve urgently. Captain, I need to tell Detective Martinez something important about Dr. Foster, Lucy said with the same determined voice she'd used to convince the doctors about the cyanide poisoning. Captain Rodriguez knelt down beside her. What is it, sweetheart? When she visited my daddy in the hospital, she wasn't just giving him poison, Lucy explained quickly. She was also asking him lots of questions about his work, about which buildings he'd helped construct around the city. She seemed really interested in the new Harrison Tech headquarters that his crew had been working on. Captain Rodriguez felt a chill of realization. What kind of questions? About the ventilation systems, about where the executive offices were located, about security cameras and emergency exits. She said she was just curious about construction work, but Daddy thought it was weird that a nurse would ask so many detailed questions. Through the radio, Captain Rodriguez could hear Dr. Foster's voice growing more agitated as she discussed Robert Harrison's company and its supposed crimes. But Lucy's revelation suggested that Dr. Foster's plan was far more extensive than they'd realized. She wasn't just planning to kill Mr. Harrison in the hospital, Lucy continued urgently. She was going to use Daddy's information to attack the Harrison Tech building too. That's why she needed to test the poison on him first, to make sure it would work when she used it on lots of people at once. Captain Rodriguez grabbed his radio immediately. Detective Martinez, the suspect has been planning a mass casualty event. She gathered intelligence about Harrison Tech headquarters from the Martinez victim. The device she's carrying might be intended for a larger attack. In the stairwell, Detective Martinez heard this update and understood the full scope of the threat they were facing. Dr. Foster wasn't just a grief-stricken individual seeking personal revenge. She was a domestic terrorist, planning to poison the water or air systems of an entire office building. Dr. Foster, we know about your plans for the Harrison Tech headquarters, Detective Martinez announced. It's over. We've evacuated the building and neutralized any chemical agents you might have placed there. Dr. Foster's face went white with shock. That's impossible. How could you know about... She stopped speaking as the implications hit her. The construction worker's daughter. She remembered our conversations. A 7-year-old girl outsmarted your entire operation, Detective Martinez said firmly. The same child who identified the poison that nearly killed Robert Harrison. The same child who provided the evidence that led us to you. Give up now, and maybe you can at least save yourself. For several long moments, Dr. Foster stood frozen in the stairwell, her hand still hovering over the detonator. The device was powerful enough to collapse the emergency stairwell and potentially damage the hospital's structural integrity. But it was no longer part of a larger plan to kill dozens of people. My brother would have wanted justice, not more innocent deaths, Dr. Foster finally whispered, tears streaming down her face. She carefully removed the explosive device from her waist and placed it gently on the concrete floor. As bomb squad specialists carefully secured the device and Dr. Foster was taken into custody, Detective Martinez climbed the 7 flights back to the command center. She found Lucy Martinez curled up in her mother's arms, exhausted from the most traumatic and heroic day of her young life. Lucy, Detective Martinez said softly, you saved Robert Harrison's life. You helped us catch your father's killer, and you prevented a terrorist attack that could have killed dozens of innocent people. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Lucy looked up with tired eyes that had seen far too much for a 7-year-old. Does this mean Daddy's case won't be closed anymore? Does this mean people will know that he didn't just die from being sick? Yes, sweetheart, Detective Martinez assured her. Your father will be remembered as the victim of a crime, not a medical mystery. And because of your courage and intelligence, no one else will die the way he did. But even as the immediate crisis ended, Lucy Martinez knew that her life would never be the same. She had learned that adults don't always listen to children, that hospitals aren't always safe, and that sometimes the people who are supposed to help you might actually be trying to hurt you. The final chapter of her story was about to begin, and it would determine whether these harsh lessons would make her bitter and afraid, or strong and determined to protect others the way she'd protected Robert Harrison. Dress, a simple blue outfit her mother had bought specially for this meeting, clutching her worn teddy bear and looking simultaneously brave and nervous. Robert Harrison turned his wheelchair toward her, his eyes immediately filling with emotion. The past 3 weeks of recovery had given him time to fully understand what Lucy had done, what she had endured, and how her courage had exposed a conspiracy that stretched far beyond his own near-death experience. Lucy, he said gently, his voice still slightly hoarse from the ventilator. "I've been wanting to thank you, but I honestly don't know if words exist for what you did for me." Lucy approached slowly, her mother Maria walking beside her for support. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of police interviews, media attention and therapy sessions to help Lucy process the trauma of losing her father and nearly losing another person to the same killer. "Are you feeling better, Mr. Harrison?" Lucy asked with the straightforward sincerity that only children possess. "Do your lungs work good now? Do you still taste bitter almonds when you eat?" Robert Harrison smiled, his first genuine smile since before his poisoning began. "No more bitter almonds, thanks to you. The doctors say I'm going to make a complete recovery. But Lucy, I need to tell you something very important." He reached into a folder beside his wheelchair and pulled out several official-looking documents. "After Dr. Foster was arrested, I had my best investigators look into everything she told the police about my company's AI systems. And Lucy, she was right about some things. Our medical diagnostic software did have problems that hurt people who couldn't afford the best health care." Lucy listened intently as Robert Harrison continued, his voice heavy with newfound responsibility and regret. "I've shut down those AI programs completely, and I'm starting a foundation to make sure that what happened to your father and to Dr. Foster's brother never happens to anyone else. But more importantly, I want to do something special for you." He handed Lucy an official letter embossed with the Harrison Foundation logo. "Lucy, you're going to be our first ever Chief Child Safety Advocate. That means your job will be to make sure that when children have important things to say about their family's medical care, adults listen to them. Really listen." Lucy's eyes widened as she looked at the formal appointment letter, though she couldn't read all the complicated words. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that hospitals all across the country are going to train their doctors and nurses to pay attention when children notice things that seem wrong," Robert Harrison explained. "It means we're going to create special programs so that kids like you have a voice in their parents' health care. And it means that your father's death is going to help save other people's fathers and mothers and children." Maria Martinez had tears streaming down her face as she listened to Robert Harrison's plans. Her husband's death, which had seemed so senseless and forgotten, was now going to prevent other families from experiencing the same tragedy. "There's something else, Lucy," Robert Harrison continued. "I've been learning about your father, Roberto Martinez. My investigators found out that he was one of the most respected construction foremen in the city. He helped build 3 hospitals, 2 schools, and a children's community center. He was a good man who made the world better." He handed Lucy a second document, a memorial scholarship established in Roberto Martinez's name for children who wanted to become doctors, nurses, or medical researchers. "Every year, kids who want to help sick people will be able to go to college because we'll remember your daddy and how much he loved his family." Lucy looked up at Robert Harrison with eyes that were both sad and hopeful. "Mr. Harrison, will people really listen to children now? Even kids who don't have daddies anymore? Even kids whose families don't have lots of money?" "Yes, Lucy. I promise you that they will. And do you know why I can make that promise?" Lucy shook her head. "Because you proved that the smartest, bravest, most important person in that hospital wasn't one of the famous doctors or the rich patient. It was a 7-year-old girl who refused to give up, who kept trying to save people even when adults wouldn't listen to her. You showed everyone that wisdom and courage don't depend on how old you are or how much money your family has." 6 months later, Lucy Martinez stood at a podium in the auditorium of Manhattan General Hospital, addressing an audience of doctors, nurses, and hospital administrators from across the country. She was still only 7 years old, but her voice carried an authority that commanded absolute attention from every adult in the room. "When children tell you something is wrong, please don't say we're too little to understand," Lucy said into the microphone, her words broadcast to medical conferences around the world. Sometimes we see things that grown-ups miss. Sometimes we're the only ones paying attention. In the audience, Maria Martinez watched her daughter with pride and amazement. Lucy had transformed her grief into a mission to help other families, turning the worst experience of her young life into a force for positive change. "My daddy can't come back," Lucy concluded, her voice steady and strong. "But because you're going to listen to children now, other daddies and mummies will get to go home to their families. That's how we make sure that people who die weren't forgotten. We help them keep protecting people even after they're gone." As the auditorium erupted in thunderous applause, Lucy Martinez, the little girl who had solved a mystery that stumped the world's best doctors, smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that age is just a number, that wisdom can come from anywhere, and that sometimes the smallest voice in the room is saying the most important thing. Her father's love had taught her to be observant and caring. His death had taught her that life is precious and fragile. But saving Robert Harrison had taught her the most important lesson of all, that one person, no matter how young or seemingly powerless, can change the world if they refuse to give up and keep fighting for what's right. Roberto Martinez had raised a daughter who would spend her life making sure that no parent would ever again die from a mysterious illness, while their child's concerns were dismissed as childish imagination. And in that mission, Lucy carried forward the best part of her father's legacy, the unshakable belief that every person's life has value and that love never truly dies as long as someone remembers to keep fighting for justice.